Hello, welcome to Hedgehog Naval Academy once again. This will be our second lesson in our How to Play Black Seas, and today we're going to focus on really the close quarters action. We're going to learn how to grapple and do boarding actions. But along with that, we're going to learn a little bit about striking colors and collisions, because if you execute the maneuver to approach a ship to grapple wrong, you may do a collision. So we'll cover all that today, and then we'll get, as always, we'll go into a second naval exercise, and you'll see some of these rules in action. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so you can shoot the opponent's ship to death and get it to the point where its health is low enough to cause it to strike its colors, and that's perfectly fine. But there are some scenarios that really require you to board the enemy ship and actually win boarding actions. Now, a couple reasons to do this. One is there might be treasure or prisoners or important individuals on the target ship, such as in the second scenario where you're going after a merchant ship with treasure. Pirates do that all the time, right? It could be you want to be able to capture an enemy ship, and of course you need to do that by occupying it. So all these things are done by getting close enough to the enemy ship, grappling with grappling hooks and stuff like that, and then sending boarding parties over to defeat the enemy and capture their ship that way. So let's take a quick look at how to do that. The rules are actually pretty straightforward. They might read a little bit complicated, but they really aren't that hard to understand once you see them played out. But it all starts with this one fact: you can only execute grappling after you have completed your movements, all of your movements. So if you're going at light sail, you make your move and turn, and you're done, and then you can grapple. Battle sails, you got to do both moves and finish both turns if you're going to turn. Do all your shooting, and then you decide to grapple. Same with, you can't even do it with full sail. You can only grapple if the enemy ship and your ship are at battle, light, or anchored. Battle sails, light sails, or anchored. And if either ship is going full sails, you cannot board. Alright, so let's take a quick look at the rules. Alright, so here's the typical scenario. Is the ships will be on the board. In this case, the merchant ship and the frigate are both going battle sails, just to make it simple. And the frigate has ended his turn, or ended his movement. So now you simply measure to make sure they're within 3 inches. Okay, and if they are, then the grapple test happens. Now the only die that's rolled is for the activating ship, and that will be the one grappling. In this case, it'll be the frigate. Now they're both, we'll call them both regular, just to keep things simple. Actually, merchants are usually inexperienced, but let's just kind of keep them both regular for now. Now, one of the things that's, you realize that the grapple test is only done by the active ship, and it's essentially a skill test. No modifiers. Like you do with evasions and stuff. So it's just literally, he will be successful on a 5 or 6. Now there are upgrades we'll talk about in future videos, and in the second scenario there's special rules that will give either the target of the grappling or the grappling ship a bonus to one or other rolls, whatever. Like for example, in the scenario coming up in Naval Exercise 2, a grappling ship, the grappling pirates, will have a +2 on their skill test to grapple. There's an upgrade, I believe it's called grappling nets, or boarding nets, that basically give them -1 to those grappling attempts. So it's not always going to be very simple. Of course, the veteran crews is going to be a lot easier. Okay, so let's kind of talk about, let's assume the grappling has occurred. As soon as the grappling has been successful, the ships are then kind of moved together. So the way you want to do this is you want to move both ships side by side, but at the minimum amount, turning the minimum amount. So essentially, you kind of split the difference like this. So you kind of bring them alongside each other like this. That's how you kind of do it. They don't need to be touching, but just alongside. Now, then you proceed to the next boarding action step. Now, boarding actions are really bloody. Let's put it this way. The ships will remain grappled, and boarding action will occur until one of the ships surrenders, is sunk, or the one of the ships actually breaks the grapple. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's actually a few different things here that we'll have to cover. While the ships are grappled, the very first time the boarding action happens, the boarding ship, the activating ship, gets a slight bonus. Now, here's a little image here, shows you the actual to hit numbers for the different crew sizes or crew levels when you're doing a boarding action. So it's very simple. There's not a huge swing difference, but you're rolling on a D10. So what you're going to do is you take the total number of hull points currently on the ship and divide by 10, of course, round up. So if it's in the case of a fresh frigate with 36 hull points, he get 4 dice. With a merchant, it's like 44. Well, that rounds to 4, right? So in this case, it'll both be the same. What you'll do then is each will roll their dice, and they will roll their target number or less. So we're assuming they're both regulars here, so they both have to roll 5 or less. There are no modifiers normally. However, on the first round of action, the grappling ship that initiated the grapple, the very first time they do the boarding action, they'll get a +1. Now, there are some upgrades and some other special rules in scenarios that may give you bonuses, but we're just going to keep it simple here. So it is very simple. You roll your dice, see how many hits you get. For every hit, you take off 2 hull points off the opposing ship. Then, in a case of critical hits, if you do roll ones, you basically double the damage. So it's instead of doing 2 points for that one you rolled, you do 4 points of damage. So all you're doing is shaving off hull points here. But it's more brutal than that, because at the end of that round of boarding actions, only one pair of rolls, one for the attacker, one for the defender. At the end of that, whoever took the least amount of damage is the winner. The other one will have to take a look at the total damage they've taken, and if they are below half of their hull points, not strike colors, but if they're below half of their hull points, then they have to make an immediate skill test or surrender right there on the spot. So it is possible to basically do a little bit of damage coming in, or even a lot, and then just one boarding action brings them below half. They're nowhere near their break point, but yet they'll surrender with that first boarding action. All of a sudden, their colors are struck and they're done. However, if the boarding action result takes a ship below its strike value, it automatically strikes its colors. There's no roll necessary. It just automatically happens. So other than that, it's a draw. If neither ship is at 0, neither ship is surrendered, then it's a draw, and you kind of stay there exactly as it is, waiting the next shift to activate. Now, if the merchant's the next one to activate, he has a choice. He can either try to basically disengage, repel boarders and disengage, or he can go ahead and fight. Now, this is where the experience matters, because to disengage you have to roll a skill test, okay, in order to move. Now, the problem is, if your ship has already been reduced to less than half of its original ship points, you add +2 to the skill test. So it's actually it should be a little easier to get away if you're more motivated to get away. But we'll have to see. But anyway, so on an inexperienced crew, they're going to get away at a 6. But of course, the regulars, so on a 5 or 6, they'll get away. If they are successful in this attempt, they will then be able to go to light sail. Oh, right now, as soon as the ships are grappled, they're considered anchored, even though they're not really anchored. But as soon as one of them disengages, that ship goes at light sail and then can activate normally. But it cannot fire that turn. That's extremely extremely important because they're still going to be the crew's still going to their normal workstations on the ship. Okay. Now, if you decide if you are unsuccessful with the repelling, you're just stuck. You can't fight because you're not really putting any effort into attacking the opponent. You're just going into trying to cut the lines between the two, cut the grapples, and flee. All right, now it gets really interesting when you're dealing with firing. You're trying to shoot at a ship that's grappled with another ship because it's very dangerous. Because if you fire at one ship that's grappled to another, both ships take damage. Neither of those ships, though, can take criticals. They're only regular shot. Damage, right? Now, it could be possible that when you look at the way the ship is lined up, the ship may come in and be firing. Let's just use this as the target. It's here. He's going to try to fire in here. He's going to end up hitting both ships just because that's the way the rules read. But he's in a position to rake this with a bow rake. So the way, barring any FAQ or errata or anything, we play it so that this ship will take a rake damage, in this case bow if it were reversed to be stern, but the other ship wouldn't. Of course, if both ships are in that, then they would both suffer the appropriate rake. So it's going to be very careful when you're trying to shoot at a grappled ship because you may damage more than just your opponent. So now, if more than one ship is grappled, let's say that this frigate comes up alongside the other and successfully grapples. Now, what you're going to do is you're trying to determine, when either ship grapples with the opponent, you only consider that the attacking ship's hull points to figure out how many dice it gets to roll. Same with Defender. Only the two ships actually involved in that particular exchange are what you use to figure out how many dice they get. However, if there are multiple ships on either side, what you do is you total up the total number of hull points on both sides of a multiple grapple. Okay? And whichever side has a greater number of hull points combined, they'll get +2 dice. +2 to their boarding to hit roll. So again, here's the 2 hit table. 4, 6, 5, or 6, right? You get +2 to that. You'd still only be fighting, the two ships together, but you determine using the total hull points whether they get a +2 in their attack or not. So it's still, let's say, a fresh grapple here. Be basically 4 dice to 4 dice, even though there's 8 dice worth of enemy ships attacking it. There's 36 points here, 36 points here. Those each round up to 4. No, it's not how you do it. Only this one is rounded up. So 36 rounded up to 4 is 3.6 rounded up to 4. 44 rounds to 4. However, since there are 72 hull points fighting against 44 hull points, these 4 dice get a +2 to hit in their boarding action. Okay? So that's how that works. Now, when you figure out weather gauge here, when you've got a huge grapple like this, essentially the weather gauge still works. You hit, each ship activates in the same weather gauge order. So if the wind is coming in from this direction, they'll activate in this order. You have to, if you have 2 grappled ships such as this, wind is coming from this direction, they both hit. The crew with the higher experience goes first. If they're the same experience, the ship who originated the grapple would go first. Okay? But again, because they're both grappled, if this one would attack first since it grappled, this one would then respond with a grapple attempt or an attempt to disengage. Okay? Now, when more than 2 ships are grappled like this, it's always goes with the most experienced. So if all three were, in a dead heat, okay, it goes in the order of the most experienced crew, followed by the ship that first initiated, followed by the next ship that initiated, so on and so forth. It goes. You have to stagger the order, starting with the most experienced, and then where they're the same, you go whoever initiated the grapple. That's the one that goes first next. So I hope that was not too confusing, but that's how you end up doing the grapples, the order of activation when ships are grappled. Okay, so that's all there really is to boarding actions. All right, so let's talk about striking the colors. And at some point during the combat, the ship is going to take so much damage, or so many crew casualties, that it just becomes hopeless, and the crew have to basically give up. They either just focus on keeping the ship afloat and saving themselves. They just know they can't take anymore. So they'll surrender, and the way that is done is by striking the colors. You take your flags down, okay, your national flag down. So on all of these ship cards, below your hull points on the wheel here, you've got a flag that has a number on it. In case of a frigate, it's 15. As soon as your ship, for any reason, falls below this number, so as soon as it takes numbers, it's down to 11 health or less, it will immediately take a skill test, a normal skill test. If it passes, it can continue acting. If it fails, it immediately strikes its colors. It's no longer in play. It cannot activate, and it cannot be shot at or shoot. Now, one other thing that's, because again, the conventions of warfare, that's why you can't really shoot at them for that reason. They've given up. They're basically a non-combatant at that time. Now, one thing that it will do is, at the next time it activates, because it's going to have its wake marker on it when it is activating next, even if it struck its colors the first time. As soon as, if you strike the colors immediately upon taking the damage, during your next activation, you're going to go to, if you're battle sails, you're going to go to light sails. You're going to go forward 1 and just stay straight. The next turn, you're going to go to anchored, stay straight. Now, usually though, if you survive that initial, roll when you first come below, you're striking the colors. Now, every time you activate, as long as your ship is below the value on that flag, you have to make a skill test to avoid striking your colors. So, the next activation, if you still haven't struck your colors, you make that skill test. If you're successful, I would suggest you repair your ship. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So that you can bring your hull points back up above 12, the number on or equal to or above the number on that flag, so you can avoid striking the colors. But if you fail during that activation with your skill test, what you'll do then is, just as I mentioned before, you're going to go to anchored as quickly as possible. So again, you can only change level of sails one time per activation, one level. So you'll go from battle sails down to light sails. You'll execute your move. If you're light sails, you go to anchored. Again, you'll drift the first movement, and then you're anchored. So even though you're not doing anything, you're still moving, and your ship, even though it's struck, is still afloat, and it is now a potential hazard. It can be in the way of other ships. It can provide cover. So you get partial or fully obscured targets that way. It may prevent the opponent from going in a particular area because you don't want to collide into it. That could be very dangerous. Now, you can leave it as the colors are struck, just as is. Sit on the table. If the scenario allows it, you can come alongside, grapple at the end of your turn, grapple into the colors ship that has its colors struck, and you'll automatically execute a boarding action that will automatically succeed. No damage is taken. You just take control of the ship. It is still at its its health of whatever it is. So it's still below that 12. It's just not. Its colors no longer struck. It is a captured ship, And there are rules in the particular scenarios where you can use captured ships, and it'll explain it for you. We won't cover that right here. Okay. But in the case of forts and other land fortifications, they will also have a similar rule. They will surrender if they take a certain amount of damage. So when we cover fortifications, we'll talk more about how they surrender. But it's the same concept. As soon as you fall below the number on your flag, you make skill test. If you succeed, you can continue to activate normally, except at the beginning of each activation, you have to, again, make that skill test until that value is reached. So your hull points are at that level or higher. Alright, now sometimes in the midst of a battle, your ships are they get to be pretty close range to each other. And whether you intend it or not, they're in a position. Remember, the very first thing you have to do when you activate is you have to move forward. So here, just in this particular setup, this ship is activating first, or activating next, after this merchant ended up in front of it. Well, I can't turn anything. I have to go forward by 5. And so, as I do that, you can see my ship's hull makes contact with the merchant vessel's hull. So you can put the marker there just to show where it would end up. The key here is if the hull itself makes contact with the other ship's hull, not the masts, not necessarily just the figurehead, but the actual hull itself, then you've actually got yourself a collision. Of course, we don't want that, so we're putting the marker here just to hold the position for us. We're going to have to now try to avoid that collision, because a collision, when it occurs, consists of 2 parts. One is the attempt to evade, and one is, if you fail, the actual collision itself. So, I know I've brought my ship into contact, hull to hull, with the merchant, so now we have to try to evade. Both ships at this point are going to roll their skill test. Fortunately, neither one wants to be hit, so they have an incentive to get out of the way, which is a quick turn of the rudder or shifting the sails to kind of move the ship out of the way one way or the other. And so they'll receive a +1 to the skill test. So a regular crew would succeed on a 4, 5, and 6. An experienced crew will succeed on a 5 and 6. So you both roll, and if either of the ships is successful, you do not actually collide. Okay? And then what you do is you complete the move. So here, obviously I can't end my move on him, but since I'm going battle sails, I'll do another move to go here, and so that's my full move. I can't turn, okay, because I'm trying to evade. I'm just going to go right through with my entire move. And here I can turn now at the end, but I could not turn at the middle because you can't end on the ship, right? On the enemy ship. So you have to go all the way through it before you can actually do your turn. All right. However, if it doesn't have enough distance left, so if I was, unfortunately, would only end up here maybe, that much further, I have to actually stop before we actually collide. So you leave it so the ships are just outside of range. That way they're not actually touching. Okay. Now, you don't have to worry too much about the exact positioning because you are, getting yourself out of the way. You're trying to avoid. You're going to stop just short of actual contact. You can kind of, you can tweak it a little bit. It doesn't turn. You can turn a little bit. If you have not actually hit, you can obviously turn a regular turn to even go to a full broadside in many cases. Okay. Now, there's one additional modifier to that ship. To the skill test for evading. If either of the ships is 2 sizes smaller than the other. So this is a large merchant. No, sorry, that's a medium-sized ship. That's a small merchant. If this were a tiny ship, or if an extra large and a frigate collided, or a large and a brig collided, there's two size differences between them. Then both ships get, the smaller ship gets +2 to its roll. So instead of the +1, it's +2. Fortunately, that makes it a little easier to evade when you're a small ship against something a little more massive hulk. So that'll make it even easier. Now, unfortunately, if you fail, you do a collision, and collisions are devastating. It doesn't matter what ship you have, it's devastating. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to show you real quick a couple examples. Alright, so now this is kind of interesting. The way you actually think of the colliding, you have to think in two halves. First is the ship that is active, the one that is actually doing the hitting, in this case the frigate. They're considered the attacker. So you're going to first try to do the damage on, you got to figure out what damage is to both ships, right? So the very first thing you do is figure out the damage on the target ship, or the ship that's being run into. So for this purposes, this is the attacker and this is the defender. Now they both happen to be medium because this is a small merchant. And here's the chart. You can see if you look at the attacker size to the left, target size to the top. So in this case, the activating ship is the attacker, so that's medium. Goes over to the target size. Medium is 10. Okay, so the target ship, the ship that was hit, takes 10 damage. Notice that if it was a brig, which is smaller, or even a tiny ship, it would still take 10. Now, a brig only has 20 hull, so it's going to take 10 off of that right away. So that's not too great. Now, what you need to do, though, is because both ships get damaged, now you got to figure out how much damage this takes. In this case, you flip the roles. So now this one becomes the attacker, this one becomes the defender. And so in this particular case, again, it's both 10, but let's kind of show what could happen if this were, say, a brig that actually did the ramming. All right, it's the same thing, but this time with a brig. So let's look at the chart again. Here, the attacker is the brig, so it's small, and it's going to do 6 damage to the merchant ship, which is medium. However, to see how much damage the merchant ship does to the brig, you flip it around. So it's now the attacker is the medium merchant ship. Compare that to the small brig. So the brig takes 10 points of damage. That hurts. Okay, so you don't want to be running into something bigger than you, for sure. Now, that's not the only thing here, because speed matters. So in the first case, if this was a battle sails and I'm moving a total of, I'm going to be moving a total of my turn of 10 inches, then I'm moving over 8 inches, right? In that, and the key here is if you move more than 8 inches in your turn, or you're intending to, again, light sails is 1 movement, battle sails is 2 movements, so the knots on the ship is times 1, times 2, times 3. If you're traveling 8 or more in your last or current activation, so even last activation, you're going to add 3 to the damage. So here I was going at battle sails, that means I'm going to 10. So not only would I would do 10 plus 3 to the damage. Now that plus 3 damage also applies in reverse. So here, if it was the brig that hit, I would do 6, according to the table. Take a look at the table here. 6, small attacker hitting a medium ship, do 6 plus 3 damage. I do 9 to the merchant ship, but the merchant ship would do medium to small, so that's 10. I would take 13. The brig would take 13 damage. 13 damage. I don't know if you could. Here's the brig's card. 13 damage brings it from a 20 down to a 7. It is really close to striking its colors. Now, if it had taken any damage at all before that, it is going to have to try to test to strike its colors immediately. So collisions are something you definitely want to avoid. And worse is when you collide with terrain. We'll talk about terrain in a different scenario, the next lesson. But notice in the chart, there's also terrain here. Terrain is going to do its own amount. You can't do any damage to the terrain, but the terrain is going to damage your ship very, very heavily. So frigate, fifth rate, or small merchant traveling in at battle sails is going to take 23 damage, and a brig is going to take 19 damage at at battle sails. So colliding into land was really going to hurt you. It may also require you to have to do some repairs. All right, so that's the deal with evading and colliding, and hopefully you'll be able to judge your distances right and your speeds right, so that you can end within 3 inches of the opposing ship that you want to grapple instead of running smack dab into it. So hope this lesson was helpful. Stay tuned and take a look at the second naval exercise, where we'll actually watch the grappling unfolding, and hopefully no one collides with each other. But if they do, now we know how to handle that. Alright, so thanks for sticking around. Share, like, subscribe to this video, and we'll see you in the next naval exercise. Bye-bye.